So today's topics, we're actually going to go over ADR. We're going to go over the spoiler-ish type things for the two ignorant hookers that I can't stand, and then I want you guys' advice on literally just deployment. I don't know if I'm overthinking it too much, but like I find so often in the game that I think that I could have done that a fuck ton better. So I just want to get
deployment.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question.
You're overthinking deployment.
Do you think about it while you're deploying?
Yeah.
You think about where, like, how often do you deploy second, though? Like, have you been going first a lot, and then your opponent counter-deploys you, and you're like, man, I deployed so badly?
It's pretty, usually I'm looking at the table, I'm looking at the terrain for deployment, and less so at the enemy's models, because, I mean, unless it's Parker, the game's going to last enough turns I can move things where they got to go. Mm-hmm. Turns-wise, not duration.
Deployment is a thing, but mostly I think deployment is a game of solitaire. I think almost never does it actually depend upon your opponent, unless the only thing I've ever done for my opponent is if I went second, I may 180-degree flip my army. Like, my Warcaster is always in the middle.
Your army has a footprint, and the only thing that you might do is literally inverse that footprint.
Right.
Okay, so you think that maybe when I put the list together, I should just... Okay, well, this shit's how it's going to sit down. That's it?
Yeah, like, when I was playing Sorsha 2 all the time, like, I would deploy my army and not even know what my matchup was.
I think looking at terrain is the most important part, especially if you're going first, and then secondarily, I mean, the only thing that really is important is, like, if I have an AD unit, what would it rather be across from?
Yeah.
Right, and that's where, like, the flipping comes in. So if you have Nis Hunters, they're on the side of your Warcaster that there is a forest.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like, Nis Hunters, I see a forest. That's where they go.
I'm so good.
If you're running...
Same thing with Errants, really.
Yeah,
right. If you're running, like, if you're running Great Bears, Black 13th, any of the character units, you put them behind a wall, and then what do you do?
Probably next to your caster.
Yeah. So, like, there's those kind of things.
Okay.
Gorman always... Anything that has short range always goes far forward as you can. So, like, Gormans and...
While being safe.
Anything with speed 4, like, front, forward, on the line as fast.
So you're saying short range... I mean, obviously, okay, slow shit you want forward, obviously, so it can go further forward. Low range shit you want forward, that way you can...
Well, let's talk about this more later on, because I think we're getting into good topic.
Ha-ha! Good
Probably
topic.
shouldn't it be pre-ramble.
Meat and potatoes and such.
Hi, Richard.
So, Spence, I believe you had another topic you want to talk about this about.
Okay, I mean, you're going to hear more about this in the pre-ramble, but the pre-ramble which we put after the podcast. So.
That's true.
You're breaking the fourth wall down.
I'm supposed to do it that way?
That's the best way to do it. Lord Fool.
He usually puts in the 30 minutes of static at the start.
So
that's probably why we don't have an audience.
We were going over this, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to effectively just deploy your army. And certain things we were going over were, like, a lot of times, like, your army has a footprint, is what you all were saying, and you put it down in a very specific way each time. Max said something that I kind of agree with in the idea of, well, realistically, you have to consider the terrain on the table, but I almost never look at my opponent's army and deploy in according to that. I've been trying to lately, but it's not easy. I mean, it's just, I don't know what I'm looking for aside from the obvious. Like, you said, okay, Nis Hunters, they have Hunter. They're good in forest, so put them near forest. It's like, aside from the really obvious, simple thing like that, what I'm looking for is something, okay, if I see my enemy's Colossal across the table, what do I want to put across from their Colossal? If I see my enemy have Boom Howlers right there, what do I put across from them? And aside from just like, don't be dumb, know what kills this, I mean, just, what would you put across from specific things?
I have a question about what your topic is.
Okay.
Are you saying you specifically want to know how to deploy against them? Or... So the concept of, I'm deploying second, I see where all your stuff is, how do I counter-deploy it? That's one way you can look at it.
We'll go with that.
The second way I was kind of looking at it, are you saying about how to unpack your army and make sure it fits properly in a cohesive unit after you've moved forward?
I'm going to go with the first one.
The first one for right now.
The first one for right now, because, the unpacking your army and And
So
getting
let's
it to
just
move
talk about-
cohesive unit,
let's
I
first
figured out with the
talk
Harbinger
about
list.
Deploying against someone.
Okay.
Okay. So obviously the first thing to understand is target priority. What do you need to kill? What is the most scary thing to your list, and how do you neutralize it? That is really just an experience question. Like, obviously we can't just tell you, like, every possible matchup between units, solos, and things.
We're going to.
If
Go.
you
We're
see
not.
errants, put Verse across from them.
But Harlan versus across from
Yeah.
Aaron's.
Holy shit.
Because they will get a spell put on them.
It's common.
I did that one
In this,
time.
I was going to say, like it's really common to have a lot of casters, a lot of players will automatically put in those nullification models like Gorman in the list.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, nullification models are really the strongest model that you have to deploy in a certain way. So, like, generally when I'm deploying, most stuff stays. It's mostly a game of solitaire. I put the same thing down every single time. Maybe I'll invert it, 180 degrees, because my Nis Hunters would normally go on my left side, but there's forests on the right side, so I'll put them there. Or, oh look, there is a wall, 16 inches of the board, so I'll put the Ulans on this side as opposed to the other side, so they'll all hide behind that wall. It's so far up there, that's an awesome idea. But the only thing that I always, like, I will literally move my whole army left or right, or literally upend entire unit formations in order to make sure Gorman or Iris, or, well, maybe not Iris unless you're running a whole lot of advanced deployment, but to make sure Gorman and Iris and those kind of models are exactly where they need to be at the start of the game to make sure that they're engaging, turn 2.
I think this is more about the second thing we talked about than the first one. I think for right now we're just trying to talk about specifically wagering your deployment
Gorman.
versus your opponent's deployment.
Gorman. We
Gorman's-
all know what Gorman does,
Right.
okay? So the theory is, then, Parker, where do you want Gorman to be on your line? You said toward the front, okay? So what do you want
at the
to...
very front only, ever.
Very front, 24-inch mark on the table?
It's not
do you want
usually where I
to
put him.
Where do you put him?
I usually put him nestled right in a corner, like on the ass of my Warcaster. Because in Crix, it just depends on what he's doing. In some lists, he's there to provide a cloud, and that's what he does. And if that's not the case, he can run 12 inches, and he's an inch further back than Parker's. I mean...
Okay. So then my thought is, obviously you want to leverage him against, like, if you can get him to a Black Whale Colossal or Black Whale Caster, that's game breaking. We know that. That's what he does. But what do you leverage him against your opponent's side? How do you get him there without getting him killed by those things, obviously? Because you've seen me try and run Eris a bunch
Hold
of
on,
times.
I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So the first topic we decided to talk about was counter deployment.
Yes.
So we can't really talk about what you are playing as counter deployment because every list is going to be like, if you're playing Trolls, telling us where to put Gorman is not going to help.
Well, no, my question it relates to the first topic. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, let's cover the first thing and then we can move on and talk about the other stuff. So if your opponent has a Colossal or they have an AD unit, things like that, if your opponent has a Colossal, you need to look for terrain on the board that is going to affect the Colossal, like walls, obstructions, things like that, even forests because they can't see through forests. And you need to try and put whatever the Colossal is trying to fight against on the opposite side of that to hinder them as much as possible. Like, when your Colossal wants to go in and punch your big medium-base shield wall warders or shock troopers or whatever your big tough unit is, you want to put them in a spot where the Colossal can't stand in melee with them. Like, if there's a wall, you want to put them opposite the Colossal of the wall. So that way, it basically can't get to what it's trying to kill. Like Behemoth. I know Behemoth dies if Earthbreaker charges it. So I'm going to put it in a spot where the Earthbreaker cannot physically fit.
But
So that's obvious.
I was about to use the Behemoth as a great example of if you know that they have a non-reached bruiser that's going to do crazy much of damage. And that's another thing about walls. In point of fact, in my opinion, forests do interact somewhat because you need to have a Pathfinder to move through them. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, the thing that you're interacting with most and you're really looking at most when you're deploying is walls. Walls are such a big deal to this game. Mm-hmm. +4 defense, immunity to non-reach models, more or less, +2 defense against non-reach models. And then, you have to be Pathfinders to get over them. They're so strong in this game. Most of the time, my deployment is determined more by walls than anything else. And again, that's kind of a game of solitaire. You don't necessarily need to know what your opponent's doing because you go, okay, I'm going to make sure my is going to be on the other side of this wall. So he's going to have to come at me, and he's not going to be able to shoot me off. +4 defense.
I do think walls are super strong, but I think with the way they changed Steamroller this year, that maybe hills in the past were underutilized for their strength against shooting. I think they're even more powerful because they can actually still be in zones. And the fact that it stacks with cover bonuses and stuff like that makes it even better.
That's a good point. Just terrain in general. I think it's more important if you're trying to learn how to deploy your army. First, you have to understand, like, if you win the roll to go first or second, you actually need to sit down, look at the table for a second, and picture how the first round's going to go. Because if you're playing a scenario list, obviously you would think you would want to go first for the board advantage of being able to run first. But sometimes it's better knowing that you can score on the top of 2, or the bottom of 2, sorry. So,
I.e., one time, Brandon made a map.
I didn't make this
map.
I did not make this map. Richard,
you didn't make that map? Oh, okay.
You should hate
Richard made a
forever.
map. He thought,
Richard,
hey,
you
it'd be cool. Oh yeah, Richard, the guy who may or may not be here anymore.
He's asleep.
Yeah. He made a map that was like, you know what? Oh, what? Is that Richard?
I'm the map maker.
Okay.
I'm the map.
And Richard's like, you know what I'm going to do this game? I'm going to make a tournament map that has, the Nile running through it.
It was like a 38-inch river.
Holy fuck.
It was like barges could float upon it. It was huge.
Well, the best part about it is that it followed the exact deployment zone of one side of the table. It was just barely outside the deployment zone and ran at like a 10-degree diagonal angle across the board.
Yep.
So I'm playing a Borka 1 Meat Mountain list, which is just a super brick. And Parker.
I was playing Asphyxiast 1, I kill all armor always.
Mm-hmm. So normally I would automatically lose this game. Instead, I won on scenario on turn 3. Because Parker's army was in his deployment zone trying to get through the river.
It was awful. I won first turn, and I go, well, my army is slow. I always want first turn because I want that first turn of movement. I want that proactive
even
position.
Consider how the game is actually going to play out because it's just every player thinks automatically, I want to go first.
Yeah.
So, okay, then this will transition to the next question, which I've actually never considered how to actually do this in a game. I mean, it's important in theory, but something I really had to consider was the Harbinger list. So I played that a ton. You played it a ton at the same time, so I got to watch somebody actually play the exact same list in person and see it from two different directions. And like the way you moved her up in the cloud of bastions, which makes sense if you say it that simply. With the way I her up, I have wall of bastions, both run charge up as far as I can.
And she's like parting the sea of bastions right in front.
Yeah, and it's like the ones on the fringes she can't do anything with, so I'm just throwing away 3 bastions apiece, which is, that's. So my thought was, learning from that game was considering, okay, where is my footprint of this army going to be? Not just here in my deployment zone, but where is it going to be out there? Mm-hmm. And that was a big thought for me too. So now I'm trying to figure out how to apply that to other armies. And whenever I'm looking at it, it's not as easy and consistent as just keep my caster in this big cloud. Because the Harbinger, she has her martyrdom range.
Right.
So you want to keep your things within your martyrdom range.
So let's move into the next topic, which is unpacking your army.
Okay.
And I'll piggyback off of what he just said. One of the things that's interesting is I used to, I don't much anymore, but I used to play games against myself. And it seems like a really sad, lonely boy thing to do. But the thing that I got from it, if there was anything else.
Holy shit, how long was that first 2 turns? Are you fucking kidding me? Okay, I love you. I'm just saying. Holy fuck.
Parker, I actually am very glad you said that because I was going to argue that people need to do the same thing. When you're trying to understand the footprint of an army, just take it, don't even put models on the other side of the table, but set up a table. I don't care if you're at the game store doing this. And someone's like, you want to play a game? You're like, I need to do this real quick. Hold on, give me 20 minutes. And you deploy your army as you normally do. You move forward. And then after your second turn of unpacking your army, you look at the board and you're like, this is the same situation I'm always in. I wish these models were here instead. Put those models where you want them to be, and then back up in reverse order and pack it back up into your deployment zone.
Those kind of games are when I learned that Epic Sorcia always, that first turn, whatever you do with Epic Sorcia, she needs to have a small base lane so she can move forward second turn. Like, I learned that because what I found out is that Epic Sorcia needs to move forward second turn. If she doesn't move forward second turn, you're losing so fast.
That's how you'll solve a lot of your activation order issues, because like you don't have the problem of I boxed in my caster who needs defeat before anything else goes. Like, you're not losing the efficiency. You don't activate your choir and realize that your jacks have run out of range to passage them. Like, you don't do those things when you've unpacked your army a few times and you understand. Like, when I got so good at playing my Epic Sorcia list that literally I didn't even look across the table while I was deploying, and my first turn was always the same, and I never had a problem on my turn 2 doing what I wanted.
So it almost goes back to what Parker was saying about how it's almost solitaire when you're first doing this, because, I mean, your army just needs to get forward. So at this point, it has nothing to do with your opponent has. Maybe you don't need to consider that as much as I just need to get my army forward so I can then start applying things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, if you're at this level of play, like where you're just looking to unpack, you know so little about your opponent really anyway. What are you really doing? Like,
that's true.
You can't sit and stare at all their cards and learn all the things they do. So why don't you first concentrate? Just get you, learn you, be okay with you and what you're doing, and then then find time to get what your opponent's doing. Because, like
Very
Brandon
good.
said, when you can play that solitaire game really, really well, then while you're doing that, you're going, okay, what does he do? What does he do? What does he do? Like, your arms are just moving everything, but you're asking and looking across at your opponent. It gives you time, kind of literally during your turn, that you could be just sitting and staring at their army at the top of 3 or top of 2, where you're looking and staring. Instead of doing that, you're moving all your stuff, but the wheels are already spinning for later parts of the game.
Okay.
Because you're not sitting there wondering, oh man, how do I get my bastions out of the fucking
you don't
way?
got to think about positioning of your models. You don't got to think about order of activation. It just happens.
Actually,
And you adjust how your gameplay normally goes to what you're playing against.
This is making me think of two different people that I've seen play two different ways and say play two different ways. So, number one would be Jeremey. Whenever I see Jeremey Constance up at tabletop playing, okay, he's been playing for a long time. There are a lot of newer things coming out that he flat out doesn't know what it does. Mm-hmm. He has a lot of experience under his belt. He has he's a solid player, and a lot of times he doesn't know what enemy models is. Like, does anything over there have guns? Like, he has very simple questions like that, and it gives him a lot. And he doesn't do bad. He doesn't, and it's the sort of thing where he doesn't really, I guess, I don't want to say need to know everything on the other end of the table, because he knows his stuff that well. He knows what he's going to do with his stuff. And that's kind of a play style, and I'm not going to say it's the top end, hey, aim to just be so good you don't have to know what your opponent does, but maybe the idea of like Parker said, know your stuff well enough that you're playing just to play your stuff well, and you're going to figure it out as you go along. And maybe that will piggyback on something Richard said last time we were here about how Richard said he does not have the time, and he does not want to invest the time in sitting down and memorizing every stat of every model in the game, which is valid. That's plenty of people who play this game. And you don't really have to if you do that. So the solitaire part of it, as opposed to considering so much of, I got to worry about that and that and that, like I said earlier, like, where do I put my stuff in accordance with their stuff? Maybe it's not so much that, it's just, like Parker said, figure your stuff out first and then move forward with it. So do the Jeremey thing, and I guess...
And just a small note, another thing to do when you're still learning to do your army well and just kind of trying to understand what your opponent's doing while you do your army well, it's easy to generalize things like, what's that unit? Well, it's a shooty unit, so it's like gun mages, widowmakers, things of that nature. It's like, generally, if I engage them, they're not very good. So, like, just basic concepts. They're probably high defense, low armor, long range, good rat, and they suck in melee. Like, that's a general concept of most shooting units.
Mm-hmm.
When
It's like, what's this unit? It's a super hard hitting weapon matching. All right, Bane Thralls, Doom Reavers, things like that. It's easy to generalize them. Obviously, there's going to be some special rules you probably need to pick up on, but for the most part, you can understand the concept of how to play against them just by understanding what they do.
The perennial question that I ask is, while I'm moving my army that second turn and I'm doing it all on auto, is if I don't know a threat range, like I just go, like, that's a great question to ask, because Jake Shealy, another guest of the podcast, he's a great guy. Whenever I play him, the biggest compliment he always gives me is, he goes, Parker, I love playing you because you never give away any of your things. Like, you don't let me just automatically charge your thing. Because when you're desperately trying to figure out how your own army works because you haven't been playing it enough, you do things like run this model 12 inches. Well, you just ran right into the threat range of the thing that will murder it so hard it's trivial.
Yeah, sometimes it's easy to mistake a bad player for a good player until you get to the point where they don't ask you any questions about your army, and you know they've placed all of their models just out of your threat range, and that's when you know that you're probably going to have a hard game.
So if you can get there, well, that's one of the things. When you have that autopilot level, and you go, okay, well, I know I can move this army up to 8 inches from where it is right now and get all my things done that I need to do, my order activation things. And I'm going to ask him, what's the threat on that unit? And he's going to say, well, 14 or whatever. And you're going to go, okay, well, 8 inches is a bad idea. I'm just going to do that 6. Mm-hmm. So the whole army does exactly what it was supposed to do before, but now the whole army is now 2 inches back from what your standard auto deployment is. So now to do your whole army set up for turn 3, it looks great, or sorry, turn 2 or turn 3, but now your opponent doesn't get what he wants to do because you're just out of threat.
And never be afraid to ask people what their threat range is, or do you have lots of AoE attacks? Do you have lots of shooting? Just all kinds of questions like that. If you have no idea what their stuff's going to be doing, ask questions like that, because can't imagine a person that you would ever play a second game against that would not give you an honest answer willingly.
Once again, this community is not really filled with a lot of assholes.
Right. I'm playing 2 galleons with Hotshot. You should probably put your guys fucking far apart. That's going to be pretty obvious in most matchups. But when you don't know, you don't know. So.
And again, if you haven't unpacked your own army and you don't have practice with that, and that takes a lot of solitary practice, in my experience, a lot, then I say a lot, I mean 5 or 6 probably attempts, which is a lot more than most people do, because most people play 5 or 6 games with an army before they completely change it or toss it. Mm-hmm. Then when you unpack that many times, you have that comfortability with it. Because what I see happen sometimes is my opponent is, they get ready to move their second model that they moved in the game, and they look across and they see my thing, and they go, what does that do? I go, well, it does this, this, and this. And they go, oh. And then they just take that model they have their hand on, and they just completely change what they were going to do with it, and they do some really silly thing. Mm-hmm. And they take it completely out of the game. Because they should have just continued to do their thing and just just keep it out of the threat. But that happens when people haven't unpacked their army enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we can cover this more when we go over hardcore.
Maybe. Or we can cover lots more of it right now.
All of it now.
All right.
I just like being able to see the little blue lines.
I'm pressing this big red button.
Hold on a second. Does anyone have anything else to cover specifically about unpacking or deploying your force?
I will say this will be the last thing I would say about this is unpacking is unpacking is really hard to reflect. Packing, asking your opponent how did this game go? Reflecting about unpacking is really hard to do after 5 turns. It's really hard to do after 5 turns.
It's really a question you have to ask yourself after you... Basically, was all of your stuff in position for your big turn 3? Because most big conflicts happen on either bottom of 2, top of 3 situation.
It becomes a lot of conjecture and chain of events whenever you try to do it at the end of the game. Mm-hmm. That's why it's one of those things that is so much better pre-practice rather than post. On.
And something you can do if you're trying to practice that is just take pictures of the battlefield on that pivotal turn, when you're about to do your big initiate or you're about to get initiated on. Take a picture before and after with your smartphone, because every fucking gamer has a smartphone, and then just look at it after the game and be like, yeah, I probably should have had a bunch of the stuff in different places. And that shows you need to work on your unpacking.
So Brandon.
So Park.
I had a second to collect my thoughts after we talked, and this is the thing. The reason why historically I never play Signar at serious tournament when I'm playing for real is I have a horrible tendency, and this is just a player thing that I do, is play my caster extremely aggressively.
Right. That's usually not what Signar wants to do.
Signar is so bad at that. And even, and I don't even mean like get them in combat. I just mean like I like to run them all, right? Like I'm going to use all their focus. I'm going to use all their abilities. I'm going to shoot with their hand cannon. Like that's what I want to do. And
that's definitely a KOR approach.
Yeah, that's just like, and one of the reasons why I played Signar, I started playing Signar like when the game came out, and when I got back into Mark II, I was not having any fun playing Signar, and then I got Jeremy's Kador, and I've been expanding it, and it was instantly just like, oh, so when you drop all the focus from these casters, they don't die. Well, cool.
So do you think Zerkova 2 is going to be frontline?
She almost has to be. She has to be a midline caster, because those two dudes she comes with, it's like, what's the point if they don't do anything?
Right.
She could be like a really cool spell turret kind of caster, where she's just like throwing out all kinds of crazy spells.
Well, did you hear like the special ability she kind of has?
Mm-mm.
It's basically she can give those two guys orders, but not be affected by it.
Oh, so she can be like run charge and not have to do it?
Right.
That's interesting. Is there a command range limit to that?
Probably her command range.
70 inches.
72 inches.
Yeah, you didn't hear? We're going to 6x6 tables.
It's basically 40k now.
What about
everything
8x8
is-
tables? That way you literally just can't reach things.
No, everything is unbound.
Nice.
Colossals, they're REQ. It's a new terminology. It's required to.
Nice.
So everyone, they realize they have so much money invested in molds and plastic for these giant shitty things that they're making them a requirement to play.
Now for trolls, how many Mogs is that?
No. We're talking gargantuan. Colossals and gargantuan.
Yeah, so Mulg.
Right.
Mulg's the best gargantuan. Everyone knows
I mean,
that.
Mog is going to be required. I know that.
If they made a gargantuan mold and they put like Doomshaper writing on like a Lord of the Rings style like canopy thing on his back, I would. It would be so. It would be so awesome.
So, I was going to Brendan to finish my thought before I
Sorry.
don't finish it. No, it's fine. You guys talk all you want. If I go to a serious tournament and we want to win, because I like the idea of going in there and seriously trying to whoop up, Cador, I'm gonna automatically do better with Cador and Crix, because Cador and Crix casters can go empty and still be just fine.
Yeah.
So, and if I was playing Crix, I would do Mordenever P de Negra, probably. And if I did Cador, it would, like, my comfort zone by far is Evlod, Esorsha.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a great, like, come at me bro kind of stance. And that would be, like, probably the most competitive thing I could do, mostly just because there's nothing, I know literally every number in the list.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that would be probably the most competitive thing for
The
it.
command on the War Dog.
He's a 7.
Good job.
But
There was a little bit of hesitation there. I didn't want to see that, but you answered right.
yeah, I did know he was a 7. But anyway, actually, I don't even know if I don't
Consultus
think either of us,
Avarius.
but actually, I don't think either of us has a War Dog. So there you go. But anyway, I was going to say that I could do janky stuff, like Zerkova or the new Zerkova or P Butcher or.
Wait, what? When you say janky and you say P Butcher, I'm confused.
I like
He
I
is
like
a
P Butcher
jank.
Shooty. P Butcher Shooty is my favorite Shooty. Is my favorite P Butcher. Not because it's. I mean,
I don't
it's
know that
strong.
that's jank though.
When people in the meta know what it is, but most people, when I sit it down, people have no idea what it does. Unless you've met me or Kurt playing it, then how have you seen it before?
Yeah.
Well, you don't have the cool factor that Kurt does.
Kurt and I both consented one day that we came up with those lists that are nearly identical, completely like devoid of each other's attention of it. It was very strange.
But you're just not as cool as him, though.
I don't know. I'm a lot less liquored up.
That's true.
His name is Cool Kurt.
He's so
Why?
cool.
Yeah! God! I hate you sometimes.
here's the thing about Signar. If Signar gets the matchup it wants, Signar doesn't need to worry about it. Like if you get the E. Haley versus Crix, or you get the E. Haley versus Cador. Like if you get the matchup you want in that kind of format, then Signar does really well in that kind of format because you're just like, I know that my E. Haley, P. Haley, 3 Haley thing will murder that, so I'll play you, yes.
Yeah.
Or I know my P Kane thing will murder that, so I'll play you, yes. The problem with me and Signar anyway in the meta is if they have a boostable gun, I might just lose. But if I play them and they don't have a boostable gun, like I can look at them and go, hey, you don't have a boostable gun you can really count on in your list. So yeah, I'll play you with Signar.
Yeah.
Or I could always play a Kane. Because when I play a Kane, I never die because Kanes don't die. I think actually P Kane and E Kane are their most survivable casters in the faction, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, when you have teleport, it helps.
Yeah,
Which
teleport
Kane is in
and
the
no
new
not
ADR?
Kane 1.
Kane 1 is.
I think Kane 1
And
is a better caster.
What's that?
I think Kane 1 is just better than Kane 2.
I think it's very similar to he's very, very similar to E Striker in that way. Like P and E Striker. I think P Striker actually is the better caster, but E Striker is an amazing super solo, so he wins games by himself so hard that it's hard to ever say who's the best. E Kane's the same way. Like E Kane is just a super solo, but he can win games by himself that hard, then it's really hard to say. I think P Kane's an amazing caster.
That's just a problem with Signars. They have quite a few really good casters, and then
Yeah, they're like half and half. There's half
Yeah.
jank casters that aren't bad, they're just janky, and then the other half are amazing.
I really, really love Signar Cav, so I think I may like Haley 3 just for that reason and that reason alone. Revive on Signar Cav is pretty dumb, because I pound for pound, point for point, I think Signar Cav is probably the strongest Cav in the game. Because all the other Cav have to trade something for something. All of them say, yes, I get this really cool primary spear attack, but I have to use this little derpy sword otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I get this cool, I can have this cool speed, but I don't have Pathfinder otherwise. Like, there's a bunch of ways that they don't get everything they want. Signar, or like, oh yes, I have this awesome formation where I can all bunch up, but I can't move through my guys otherwise. So unless, like, one unit of Storm Cav with the Stormblade Captain is just so awesome. And Gunmage, Tempest Blazers are stupid. Being able to bring back either of these guys is really dumb.
Yeah.
If the rumor is true and Haley 3 has a defensive buff, like an army defensive buff, then
I don't think it's an army defensive buff. I think it's a unit buff. But I think it's just going to be flat +2 defense.
Regardless, the Blazers get dumb. Blazers get super duper dumb.
17-13 with 5 boxes. That's pretty good stats.